Listen to this amazing story of miraculous healing. Enjoy listening. The sharp chip, chip, chip of Abigail's chisel against the Carrara marble resonated through her vast, high-ceiling studio, a rhythmic counterpoint to the classical symphony playing softly from hidden speakers. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight slicing through the tall windows, illuminating the half-formed figure emerging from the pristine white block. Ascension, she'd named it, a woman caught mid-stride, limbs extended, a swirl of drapery hinting at movement and release. Every curve, every facet was meticulously planned, yet born of instinct and countless hours of physical exertion. At 37, Abigail was at the peak of her powers, her hands calloused, her forearms corded with muscle, her focus absolute. A sudden, dry cough rattled her chest, interrupting her rhythm. She waved a dismissive hand, blaming the fine marble dust that coated every surface, including her lungs. A quick swig of water from the bottle perched on a nearby crate, and she was back to it, the world outside her studio fading into irrelevance. Only the stone, only the nascent form, truly mattered. This piece for the upcoming national exhibition, it was more than just a sculpture. It was a statement, a culmination of years of relentless dedication. It was her voice, her legacy. The insistent trill of her phone from the workbench broke her concentration again. A quick glance at the caller ID confirmed her suspicion. Willow, her younger sister, free-spirited, perpetually wandering, a traveling botanist who saw meaning in wildflowers and fleeting sunsets, not in monumental, enduring art. Abigail sighed, a brief exhalation of annoyance. Before answering, her voice clipped. Willow, I'm working. Abby, just checking in. Heard you're in exhibition prep hell again. You sound a little dusty. Are you eating? Sleeping? Willow's voice, a warm, lilting melody, was a stark contrast to the sterile precision of Abigail's chosen art form. I'm fine, Willow. Swamped. This piece demands everything. Abigail's gaze was already back on Ascension, her mind tracing the next cut. Right. Because only what lasts truly matters, eh, Abby? There was a knowing, gentle tease in Willow's tone, an echo of a childhood argument. Abigail's jaw tightened. Exactly. Unlike your transient seed collections. Look, I really have to go. Don't worry. I'll call when I have a moment to breathe. She ended the call before Willow could object, her thumb pressing the screen with a decisive finality. The symphony swelled, drawing her back into its embrace, back to the unyielding stone that understood her better than any person ever could. The cough persisted, a nagging presence that became increasingly difficult to ignore. It was no longer just a dust-induced tickle. It was deeper, more frequent, a raw scrape in her throat that left her winded. One afternoon, while wrestling a heavy pneumatic tool into position, a dizzy spell washed over her, the studio tilting precariously. She stumbled, catching herself on the rough marble block, her vision blurring at the edges. Just exhaustion, she muttered, dismissing the alarming sensation. Too many late nights. But the exhaustion didn't lift. Simple tasks, like hauling bags of plaster or chiseling for extended periods, left her surprisingly breathless. She started taking more breaks, leaning against the cold stone, willing her lungs to expand, to fill with the air she suddenly felt deprived of. It was annoying, a hindrance to her work. This wasn't her. She was Abigail, the sculptor, strong, enduring. Finally, after a particularly violent bout of coughing left her gasping for air and clutching her ribs, she conceded. Not because she was worried, but because this incessant irritation was impeding her progress on Ascension. She needed to get rid of it. A quick visit to the local clinic, a prescription for some antibiotics, and she'd be back in her element. The clinic waiting room was anathema to her, sterile, impersonal, filled with the low hum of unseen machinery and the hushed whispers of illness. When Dr. Aris Thorne, a man in his late 40s with a kind but weary face, finally called her name, Abigail rose with a palpable air of impatience. Ms. Hayes, he began, reviewing her chart. You mentioned a persistent cough and shortness of breath? Yes, and I'm just perpetually tired. I think it's bronchitis, or maybe just a lingering cold. I work with a lot of marble dust, so it's probably just irritated airways. I just need something to clear it up so I can get back to my studio. I have a major exhibition deadline." Her voice was tight, her gaze fixed on the clock on the wall. Dr. Thorne nodded, his expression unreadable. He listened to her chest with a stethoscope, his brow furrowing slightly. "Your breathing sounds a bit coarse, and your complexion is quite pale, Ms. Hayes. How long has this cough been going on?" "A few weeks, maybe a month. It comes and goes." She shrugged, minimizing it. "All right, I'd like to order a chest x-ray and some blood tests, just to rule out anything serious. We'll also check for any underlying inflammation." He scribbled on a prescription pad. Abigail bristled. "An x-ray? Really? Can't you just give me antibiotics? I'm on a very tight schedule." She wanted to argue, to escape this sterile box and return to the tangible reality of her art. "It's standard procedure, Ms. Hayes. Better safe than sorry. We'll have the results back quickly. For now, try to rest when you can, and wear a mask in your studio." His tone was gentle but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Dismissing his advice, Abigail nodded curtly, eager to escape. Standard procedure, she thought. Just a waste of time. She was already planning out the next few cuts on Ascension as she walked out, the metallic taste of unease a faint whisper at the back of her throat. The phone call from Dr. Thorne came 2 days later, at the worst possible time. Abigail was in the middle of a delicate detail, her chisel poised, her breath held. The doctor's voice was calm, measured, yet it carried an undertone that sent a shiver down her spine. He wanted her to come in immediately, and he suggested she bring someone. Willow. Of course. Willow, who had called again, worried, sensing Abigail's growing fatigue. Abigail had reluctantly told her to come, just to appease her, knowing Willow would insist anyway. The sterile clinic office felt colder this time, the air thick with unspoken dread. Dr. Thorne sat opposite them, his hands clasped on the polished desk, a file open before him. Willow squeezed Abigail's hand, her own clammy. Abigail pulled away, her focus narrowed, a flicker of irritation at the unnecessary physical contact. She preferred to face things alone. "Ms. Hayes," Dr. Thorne began, his gaze direct, "the results from your X-ray and subsequent CT scan, along with the biopsy, are concerning. Very concerning." He paused, taking a breath. "You have stage 4 adenocarcinoma of the lung. It's an aggressive form, and unfortunately, it has already metastasized. We've found lesions in your brain." The words hung in the air, heavy, opaque, like the marble dust that coated her studio. Stage 4, metastatic, brain. They didn't compute. This was happening to someone else, not her. Abigail, the unyielding, the enduring. "What does that mean?" Willow's voice was a thin whisper beside her. Dr. Thorne's expression was grave. "It means the cancer is advanced. The headaches, the dizziness you've been experiencing. Those are from the brain lesions. The prognosis for this type of cancer at this stage is challenging. We're talking months, not years, Ms. Hayes. We can begin treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, to try and slow its progression, to manage symptoms, but a cure at this stage is highly unlikely." Abigail felt a cold wave wash over her, numbing her from the inside out. Her mind screamed in protest. "This can't be right." Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "I have an exhibition. Ascension is almost finished. I have plans that stretch years into the future, filled with new works, new challenges, new legacies." "Abby," Willow reached for her again, her eyes wide with unshed tears. Abigail flinched away, her gaze fixed on Dr. Thorne, desperate for him to retract his words, to say it was a mistake. "There must be a mistake. I'm strong. I've never been sick." She struggled to comprehend the idea of her own body betraying her, of something unseen and insidious consuming her from within. Her body, her instrument, the vessel through which she created. Dr. Thorne shook his head slowly. "I wish it were, Ms. Hayes. We've double-checked everything. The pathology is clear." He began to explain treatment options, palliative care, clinical trials, but his words were muffled, lost in the roaring silence inside Abigail's head. Months. It wasn't enough time to finish Ascension, let alone create a new legacy. Willow started to cry, soft, racking sobs that shook her slender frame. She reached for Abigail again, a desperate plea in her eyes. "Oh, Abby, I'm so sorry." Abigail recoiled further, a wave of profound despair washing over her. Willow's raw emotion was suffocating, a stark mirror to the terror building in Abigail's own chest. She didn't want pity, she didn't want comfort. She wanted to be back in her studio, chisel in hand, transforming the unyielding stone into something that would last forever, something that couldn't be taken away by a fleeting illness. But the future, her meticulously crafted future, had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The relentless chip, chip, chip resumed, a testament to her unyielding will. The cough, however, became an unwelcome resident. It wasn't the occasional, dust-induced clearing of her throat anymore. It was a persistent, nagging tickle that settled deep in her chest, a dry, rasping sound that punctuated her days, and sometimes her nights. Then came the breathlessness. At first it was subtle, a slight catch after hauling a fresh block of marble into position, or when she climbed the creaking wooden ladder to reach the higher sections of Ascension. She dismissed it, attributing it to the growing demands of her work, the sheer physical toll of transforming stone. "I'm pushing myself harder than ever," she'd tell herself. "It's just fatigue." But the fatigue was different too, a heavy leaden exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones, making the simplest tasks feel monumental. One afternoon, while attempting to lift a heavy pneumatic chisel, her arms felt like jelly. Her lungs burned, and a wave of dizziness washed over her so intensely that she stumbled, nearly dropping the expensive tool. She braced herself against the unfinished sculpture, gasping for air, her vision momentarily blurring. The marble, usually cool and reassuring beneath her palm, felt indifferent, a silent witness to her sudden weakness. This was new. This was alarming. The incident finally nudged her away from her studio and towards a clinic. She chose one conveniently located near the industrial park, where she sourced her stone, a no-nonsense establishment with stark white walls and the faint scent of antiseptic. She booked an appointment for what she fully expected to be a course of antibiotics for a stubborn case of bronchitis. Dr. Eris Thorne was a man in his late 40s, with a precise demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. He listened patiently as Abigail, still resolute in her self-diagnosis, described her symptoms. Persistent dry cough, going on for weeks now, shortness of breath, especially with exertion, and recently, dizzy spells. He reiterated, his voice calm, pragmatic. He noted the pale cast to her skin, the slight tremor in her hands. "Ms. Vance, while it certainly could be bronchitis, given the duration and the new symptoms, I'd like to be thorough. We'll start with a chest X-ray and some blood tests, just routine, to rule out anything else." Abigail sighed, an impatient sound. "Fine, but I have a national exhibition coming up. I can't afford any delays. Just give me what I need to get back to work." She resented the intrusion, the time stolen from her precious studio hours. The idea of her body, her instrument, betraying her was an affront. She had always prided herself on her strength, her resilience. This was just a minor inconvenience, a temporary lapse in her otherwise unwavering dedication. She mentally calculated how quickly she could be in and out, how soon she could return to the waiting stone. Only what lasts truly matters, she thought, her gaze fixed on the sterile wall, already planning the next chisel stroke in her mind. She barely registered the doctor's quiet instructions, her dismissive attitude a shield against the creeping unease she refused to acknowledge. The call came 2 days later, not from Dr. Thorne himself, but from his assistant, asking her to come in immediately. Abigail felt a prickle of irritation. More wasted time. She arrived, still dressed in her dusty work clothes, ready to argue if they tried to keep her long. Dr. Thorne met her in his office, not an exam room. His expression was grave, devoid of his usual pleasantries. He gestured to a chair, and Abigail for the first time felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice softer than usual, "your X-ray showed some abnormalities. We followed up with a CT scan and then a biopsy. He paused, looking directly at her, his gaze unwavering. The results are back. You have stage 4 adenocarcinoma of the lung. The words hung in the air, heavy and foreign. Abigail stared at him, uncomprehending. What? Lung? Cancer? That's not possible. I don't smoke. And stage 4? Her mind raced, trying to process, to fit this impossibly large, terrible thing into her meticulously ordered life. But I have an exhibition in 4 months. Ascension isn't finished. Dr. Thorne continued, his voice laced with a profound empathy that only deepened Abigail's sense of unreality. The scans also show multiple lesions in your brain. These are metastases, Miss Vance. They're responsible for the headaches, the dizziness, and the increasing fatigue you've been experiencing. He opened a folder, revealing images on a screen. Abstract, terrifying patterns of white on black. Her lungs, her brain, riddled with shadows. This is a rare, aggressive form. Our prognosis, candidly, it's measured in months, not years. We're talking about palliative care, managing symptoms, and trying to extend your life with treatment, but he trailed off, the unspoken implications chilling. Abigail's world fractured. The sharp edges of her ambition, her carefully constructed identity, crumbled. Her body, her fortress, had been breached by an unseen enemy. Months, she whispered, the word a raw, ragged sound. Her hands, so skilled at shaping the unyielding, trembled uncontrollably. The thought of her studio, the unfinished ascension, became a torment. How could her body betray her so completely? How could she be reduced to this, a mere failing vessel, when her art, her legacy, was still incomplete? Just as the full weight of the diagnosis crashed down, the door to the office opened, and Willow, her younger sister, strode in, her arms laden with a canvas bag overflowing with dried herbs and a brightly patterned scarf. Willow, the free-spirited botanist, always a whirlwind of color and chaos, a stark contrast to Abigail's rigid order. Abigail, I heard from Sarah you weren't feeling well, and I was in the area, so I thought I'd just pop by and... Oh. Her chipper voice died as she took in the grim faces, the images on the screen, the stark despair etched on Abigail's face. She looked from Dr. Thorne to her sister, her own face paling. Willow, what are you doing here? Abigail managed, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She felt a surge of resentment. This wasn't a moment for unannounced intrusions, for the forced cheerfulness of a sister she'd kept at arm's length for years. Dr. Thorne, seeing Willow's confusion, calmly reiterated the devastating news. Willow's eyes widened, her cheerful demeanor replaced by shock, then a profound sorrow. She dropped her bag and moved towards Abigail, her hand reaching out. Oh, Abby, I'm so sorry. Abigail flinched, pulling back from her sister's touch as if burned. The idea of comfort, of pity, was unbearable. She had always stood alone, solved her own problems, controlled her own destiny. This, however, was beyond her control, and the helplessness was a bitter taste in her mouth. Willow's sudden presence felt like an invasion, a jarring reminder of the life Abigail had deliberately put on hold, the connections she had neglected in her fervent pursuit of permanence. Don't, Abigail said, her voice strained. Just don't. The unyielding stone, now cracked, still resisted the tender, intrusive hand. The dizziness hit Abigail like a physical blow. One moment, she was meticulously carving a delicate fold in Ascension's drapery. The next, the studio spun, the marble blurring into a featureless white expanse. Her hands flew out, steadying herself against the rough stone, the pneumatic chisel clattering to the floor. She closed her eyes, waiting for the nausea to pass, a cold dread seeping into her stomach. This wasn't dust or fatigue, or even the persistent hacking cough that now racked her body. This was something else, something insidious, eroding the very ground beneath her feet. Reluctantly, she made an appointment. Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose quiet pragmatism belied a sharp, observant mind, had already noted her pale complexion and the persistent, dry cough that punctuated their brief initial consultation. He'd ordered a chest X-ray and blood tests, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than she found comfortable. Abigail, eager to get back to real work, had dismissed his concerns, her thoughts already on the next chisel stroke. She'd begrudgingly submitted to the tests, her usual impatience barely contained. A week later, the phone rang. It was Dr. Thorne's office, requesting she come in and bring a family member if possible. "It's important," the receptionist had said, her voice unusually soft. Abigail scoffed. Important? What could be more important than the final stages of ascension? She considered calling her assistant, but then remembered the exhibition deadline. Her parents were out of the question. They'd just returned from a cruise. Willow? The thought flickered and died. Her free-spirited sister, perpetually traveling, was likely halfway across the globe, chasing some rare orchid. Besides, Abigail didn't need emotional handholding. She needed answers, a quick fix, and then she needed to get back to her studio. She arrived at Dr. Thorne's office alone, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. The waiting room felt unusually stifling. When her name was called, she walked with her usual brisk stride, a sculptor's determined gait, but inside a tremor started to build. Dr. Thorne sat behind his desk, a stack of papers and a glowing light box next to him. He gestured to the chair opposite, his expression unreadable. "Abigail," he began, his voice calm, almost too calm. "The results are in. We have a diagnosis." He paused and Abigail's breath caught. "It's adenocarcinoma, stage 4. The words hung in the air, heavy and solid, like a block of uncarved granite. Abigail felt a strange disassociation, as if he were speaking about someone else. "Adeno? What?" she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. "Adenocarcinoma of the lung," he clarified gently, then continued, each word a chisel blow against her world. "It's an aggressive form, Abigail. The scans show significant metastasis, primarily to the brain, which explains your headaches, the visual disturbances, and the ataxia you reported, the dizziness. There are also lesions in other areas." He gestured vaguely to a diagram on his computer screen. Abigail stared at him, her mind refusing to comprehend. Stage 4? Metastasis? Brain lesions. This couldn't be right. Her hands, calloused and strong, felt suddenly alien. Her body, her vessel, her instrument, betraying her. "This can't be right," she repeated, louder this time, a tremor entering her voice. "I have an exhibition. Ascension is almost finished. I'm due to ship it in 3 weeks." The words tumbled out, desperate, a shield against the incomprehensible truth. She struggled to grasp the idea of her body, her life, being so utterly out of her control. Her future plans, meticulously laid out, dissolved into a chaotic swirl of fear. Dr. Thorne's gaze was unwavering, compassionate. "Abigail, I understand this is devastating news. We're talking about months, not years. The prognosis is extremely poor. Months, not years." The world tilted. The studio, the marble, the exhibition, all of it seemed to recede, becoming distant, irrelevant. A cold, metallic taste filled her mouth. She could feel the blood draining from her face. Just then, the door opened, and a whirlwind of bright colors and an earthy scent of herbs wafted into the sterile room. "Abby, I heard you weren't well," Willow exclaimed, her voice light. Then she stopped dead, her eyes widening as she took in Abigail's ashen face and Dr. Thorne's grave expression. Oh dear." Willow, her usually bright dreadlocks pulled back in a loose bun, wore a flowing, embroidered tunic, a stark contrast to Abigail's practical, dust-stained work clothes. She had clearly heard from one of their mutual acquaintances, a network Abigail usually dismissed as frivolous gossip. Now here she was, the embodiment of the life Abigail had consciously chosen to put on hold, standing witness to the collapse of everything Abigail had built. Dr. Thorne, seeing the new arrival, quickly recalibrated. He reiterated the bleak prognosis, this time with Willow as a secondary silent recipient of the devastating news. Willow's hand instinctively reached for Abigail's, her touch soft, searching. Abigail recoiled as if burned. "Don't!" she bit out, pulling her hand away. The pity in Willow's eyes was unbearable, a mirror reflecting her own profound despair. Her sister's attempts at emotional support, so immediate and unsolicited, felt like an unbearable intrusion into the wreckage of her life. She didn't need comforting. She needed to understand how to fix this, how to make it go away, how to get back to the studio. But the doctor's words echoed in her mind. Months, not years. The hammer of reality struck, shattering her carefully constructed world into a million jagged pieces. The sculpture of her life had just cracked, irrevocably. The sterile white walls of the oncology ward were a stark contrast to the rough-hewn stone and vibrant pigments of Abigail's studio. Here the only creation was pain, meticulously measured and administered. Chemotherapy, a brutal cocktail of cisplatin and pemetrexed, flowed into her veins, promising life but delivering only a deeper kind of death. The initial cycles were a blur of nausea, exhaustion, and a gnawing dread. Her once strong hands, so adept at shaping stubborn marble, now trembled just holding a glass of water. The dry cough, a constant companion, deepened, tearing at her chest with each rasping breath. Then came the whole-brain radiation, daily trips to a cold, humming machine that promised to burn away the insidious invaders in her mind, but left her feeling like her thoughts were being scoured clean with steel wool. The headaches, once a dull ache, became a drilling intensity that no painkiller seemed to touch. She watched in horror as clumps of her once lustrous dark hair came away in her hands in the shower, a tangible symbol of her body's betrayal. The mirror reflected a gaunt stranger with hollow eyes, a ghost of the vibrant artist she once was. Worst of all was the ataxia. The brain lesions, despite the radiation, had taken a firmer hold, stealing her balance, making her movements jerky and unpredictable. Walking became a conscious, clumsy effort, her feet refusing to cooperate with her brain's commands. Simple tasks, like reaching for a cup or trying to sit upright, became Herculean struggles. The chisel, her beloved tools, lay gathering dust in her studio, a silent indictment of her failing body. She would sit there sometimes amidst the unfinished ascension, its powerful form mocking her impotence. The marble, once a challenge, now seemed to sneer, an uncarved block she could no longer control or shape. Her body, the very instrument of her art, had become the ultimate uncarved block, resistant to her will, dissolving into chaos. Willow, bless her relentless spirit, tried. She'd bring Abigail strange, earthy teas with names like Peaceful Passage and Root Rejuvenation. She'd attempt to read aloud from books on mindfulness or offer to play music, anything to break through the suffocating silence of Abigail's despair. But every gesture, every kind word, felt like a fresh wound. Abigail saw only pity in her sister's eyes, a reflection of her own brokenness. "Just leave me alone, Willow," she'd rasp, turning her face to the wall. "What's the point? I can't even hold a pen, let alone a chisel. This," she'd gesture vaguely at her emaciated form, "this is just a shell, a failing vessel." Willow would sigh, her own face etched with exhaustion and worry, but she never truly left. She'd quietly tidy the studio, careful not to disturb the dust motes dancing in the sunlight that fell across the tools, as if preserving a sacred space for a ritual that might never resume. She'd prepare bland, easy-to-swallow meals that Abigail barely touched, and try to engage her in conversation about anything but the illness, anything but the art. She even tried to talk about their childhood, about the rare moments of connection they'd shared before Abigail had walled herself off in pursuit of her artistic ambitions. But Abigail's answers were clipped, her gaze distant, lost in a landscape of internal torment. The resentment simmered beneath her raw skin. Resentment at the cancer, at the doctors who delivered the grim news with such detached calm, at Willow for seeing her so utterly vulnerable, and most of all, at her own body for betraying her in the most fundamental way. She had always believed in the power of will, in shaping her destiny with her own hands. Now her hands were useless, and her will, once an unyielding force, was crumbling into dust, much like the marble chips that once carpeted her studio floor. The only thing she could sculpt now was her own despair, chiseling deeper and deeper into her soul with each passing, agonizing day. The hope she had once clung to, that she would somehow, magically overcome this, was eroding, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. The only thing she was shaping now was her own end. The sterile white walls of the oncology ward were a stark contrast to the rough-hewn stone and vibrant pigments of Abigail's studio. Here, the only creation was pain, meticulously measured and administered. Chemotherapy, a brutal cocktail of cisplatin and pemetrexed, flowed into her veins, promising life but delivering only a deeper kind of death. The initial cycles were a blur of nausea, exhaustion, and a gnawing dread. Her once strong hands, so adept at shaping stubborn marble, now trembled just holding a glass of water. The dry cough, a constant companion, deepened, tearing at her chest with each rasping breath. Then came the whole-brain radiation, daily trips to a cold, humming machine that promised to burn away the insidious invaders in her mind, but left her feeling like her thoughts were being scoured clean with steel wool. The headaches, once a dull ache, became a drilling intensity that no painkiller seemed to touch. She watched in horror as clumps of her once lustrous dark hair fell onto her pillow, a tangible measure of her body's surrender. It was a cruel irony, she thought, that the very treatments meant to save her were systematically dismantling the physical vessel she had once so carefully honed for her art. Her studio, once her sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum. She would sit there sometimes for hours in the worn leather armchair, surrounded by tools she could no longer wield. The chisels, once extensions of her will, lay cold and inert. The unfinished ascension, still majestic but somehow mocking in its silent perfection, loomed over her. Its smooth, unblemished surface seemed to sneer at her own ravaged form. Her ataxia, a cruel side effect of the brain lesions, had worsened considerably. Walking was a shuffling, precarious endeavor, and fine motor control, once her pride, was a distant memory. The idea of sculpting, of even holding a drawing pencil steadily, was a grotesque joke. Willow, bless her persistent heart, tried. She'd bring in herbal teas with exotic names, claiming they'd soothe her nausea. She'd try to engage Abigail in quiet conversations, suggesting they could look at art books or listen to music. But Abigail pushed her away, often with a sharp word or a dismissive wave of her tremoring hand. Willow's gentle acts of care felt like pity, a stark reminder of her own incapacitation. Once, Willow carefully placed a small, smooth river stone, polished by years of water, into Abigail's palm. "It's beautiful," she'd whispered, "like a tiny, perfect sculpture, just as it is." Abigail had merely closed her fingers around it and thrown it back onto the pile of unfinished materials in the corner, a silent statement of rejection. Her body was failing, and with it, her purpose. What was an artist without her art? Without her hands? Without her mind? "Just let me be, Willow," she'd rasped one afternoon, her voice thin and reedy. "There's nothing left to do." Willow had sighed, a sound that spoke of endless patience and profound sorrow. "There's always something, Abby, even if it's just being here." But Abigail didn't want to just be. She wanted to do, to create, to leave something behind. And now even that was being stolen from her. The cancer was not just attacking her cells, it was dismantling her very identity, piece by agonizing piece. The follow-up scan, 6 weeks into the relentless treatment regimen, was a death knell. Dr. Thorne, usually so composed, looked visibly uncomfortable as he delivered the news. "Abigail," he began, his voice softer than usual, "the imaging shows progression. There are new lesions in the brain, and the existing ones have increased in size." He paused, picking at a loose thread on his white coat. "And unfortunately, the lung nodules have also shown some growth." Abigail felt a cold wave wash over her, colder than any nausea, more profound than any headache. Progression. It was a clinical term, but it meant only one thing. The treatment wasn't working. Her body, her sacred vessel, was betraying her more profoundly than she had ever imagined. "What does that mean?" Willow asked, her voice tight with suppressed panic. Dr. Thorne met her gaze, then Abigail's. "It means the cancer is aggressive, very aggressive. We can continue with palliative chemotherapy, but at this stage it would be primarily for symptom management. We're really looking at prioritizing comfort and quality of remaining life now." He mentioned hospice, a word that hung in the sterile air like a shroud. Abigail didn't cry. She felt an eerie calm, a profound sense of resignation settling over her. Her hands resting in her lap felt alien, numb. The world seemed to shrink to the confines of the examination room, the doctor's grim face, Willow's trembling lower lip. That night, the headaches intensified to an unbearable crescendo. Abigail felt a strange disassociation, as if she were watching her own body from a distance. The room began to spin, not with dizziness, but with a dizzying, terrifying speed. Willow's frantic voice calling her name sounded far away, distorted. Then the world tilted, fragmented, and Abigail felt herself falling into a dark, roaring silence. She awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of tubes in her nose, a dull ache in her jaw, and a profound, terrifying confusion. Willow was there, her face etched with worry, her hand gripping Abigail's. Dr. Thorne was beside her bed, his expression grave. "You had a seizure, Abigail," he explained gently. "A grand mal. The brain lesions are causing significant neurological pressure." The words came out in a jumble when she tried to speak, her tongue feeling thick and clumsy. Useless, hands, mind, breaking. The aphasia, a terrifying consequence of the seizure, meant her thoughts were trapped, unable to form coherent words. Her right arm, already weakened, now felt almost paralyzed. Days blurred into a hazy succession of tests, medication adjustments, and Willow's quiet, desperate presence. Abigail's world had shrunk to the sterile confines of her hospital room. Her body, once an instrument of creation, was now a prison. Her mind, once a forge of ideas, was fractured, slipping in and out of lucidity. "What's the point, Willow?" She finally managed to articulate one morning, the words coming out slow and slurred, but clear enough. Her eyes, sunken and shadowed, stared blankly at the ceiling. "My hands are useless. My mind is breaking. I'm just a failing body." A tear, hot and bitter, finally escaped and traced a path down her temple. "There's no ascension meant for me, just falling." Willow, her own eyes brimming, gently stroked Abigail's hair. "Abby, no. You've created so much beauty, so much. You are more than your hands. You are more than this illness." She pointed to a framed photograph on the bedside table, a picture of Abigail's most famous early work, a swirling, dynamic piece called Tempest. "Look at Tempest. Look at all the lives your art has touched." Abigail turned her head slowly, her gaze drifting to the photograph, then to the window, where a dull gray sky mirrored her inner landscape. She saw not the triumph, but the immense effort, the struggle, the sheer physical exertion that had gone into that piece. And now all of it, every aching muscle, every blistered hand, every sleepless night, felt utterly, profoundly meaningless. All that effort to create something that would outlast her, and here she was, dissolving into nothing. Her gaze fixed on the image of ascension in her mind, the unfinished marble, a symbol not of future glory, but of her catastrophic failure. A sculptor who couldn't sculpt, a woman who couldn't even speak properly. The raw, guttural cry that tore from her throat was a sound of pure agony, of a spirit breaking under the weight of its own despair. She closed her eyes, wishing for the silence to swallow her whole. The relentless assault on Abigail's body continued, but her mind, once a fortress of ambition, was now a crumbling ruin. Dr. Thorne, his face etched with a deeper weariness than usual, delivered the news with a quiet solemnity that felt heavier than any stone Abigail had ever lifted. "The latest scans, they show new lesions, Abigail. Larger, and the primary tumor in your lung has also progressed." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, filled with an unspoken apology. "At this point, we're looking at palliative options. To manage the pain, maintain comfort." Palliative. The word hung in the air, a death knell tolling over the remnants of her hopes. Palliative. It meant no more fighting, no more illusions of a cure. It meant surrender. The next few days were a haze of escalating symptoms. The ataxia, which had made her movements clumsy, now rendered her almost entirely unbalanced. Each step was a precarious tightrope walk, often ending in a jarring lurch or a desperate grab for support. The diplopia, The double vision that had been an intermittent annoyance was now a constant, disorienting blur, making the world a fragmented, ungraspable mess. Then came the seizure. It hit without warning, a sudden, violent upheaval of her nervous system. One moment, she was attempting to make her way to the bathroom, hands clutching the cold hospital wall for support. The next, a blinding flash, a deafening roar in her ears, and the floor rushed up to meet her. When she came to, Willow was there, her face a mask of terror, the antiseptic smell of the hospital overwhelming. Her tongue felt thick, unwieldy, her thoughts a jumble of disconnected words. She tried to speak, to ask what happened, but only guttural sounds emerged. Aphasia. Yet another cruel facet of the brain's betrayal. "What's the point, Willow?" The words, when they finally came, were slurred, but laced with a profound, bone-deep weariness. "My hands are useless. My mind is breaking. I'm just a failing body." She looked at her trembling, emaciated hands, the blue veins stark against her pallid skin. These were the hands that had brought ascension to life in her mind, that had coaxed form from raw stone. Now they were foreign, useless appendages. Willow, her own voice thick with unshed tears, knelt by Abigail's bed. "But look at what you have created, Abby. Look at ascension. It's magnificent. It's a monument to strength and beauty." Abigail's gaze drifted to a photograph of her unfinished masterpiece, displayed on the bedside table by Willow. The partially carved marble figure, reaching skyward, seemed to mock her, a symbol of her grand, unfulfilled ambition, a stark reminder of her physical and artistic impotence. "It's unfinished," she rasped, her voice devoid of emotion. "Like me, like everything." She turned her head away, tears finally escaping the corners of her eyes, tracing hot paths down her temples. "I just want it to be over." Willow stayed, a silent, comforting presence, stroking Abigail's hair, which was now a sparse, wispy shadow of its former self. The studio, her sanctuary, her very definition, felt a million miles away, an unreachable paradise. She was trapped in this failing shell, a prisoner in her own body. Despair was a cold, suffocating blanket that wrapped itself around her, squeezing the last vestiges of hope from her tired heart. Days bled into weeks. Abigail floated in and out of consciousness, her world reduced to the ebb and flow of pain and the occasional fleeting presence of Willow or a nurse. The palliative care ward was quieter than the oncology floor, a place where hushed voices and soft footsteps replaced the hurried urgency of medical intervention. It was a place for acceptance, for winding down, a place where art, creation, legacy felt utterly meaningless. One afternoon, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred. A melody, light and airy, yet profoundly melancholic, drifted into her room. It wasn't the tinny program music of the hospital's intercom, but something live, raw, filled with the resonance of wood and string. A piano, perhaps. But no, it was too delicate, too intimate for a grand piano. Curious, a flicker of something other than despair stirred within her. Willow, noticing the slight tilt of Abigail's head, whispered, "It's Elias. He plays every afternoon in the common room. He used to be a concert pianist, but he lost his sight to glaucoma years ago." Abigail listened, her tired mind latching onto the simple, haunting tune. It was a piece she didn't recognize, perhaps an improvisation. There was no grandeur, no thunderous chords, just a quiet, compelling beauty. After a while, the music ceased. Later, Willow gently wheeled Abigail's chair into the common room. The space was sparsely furnished, bathed in the soft, diffused light from a large window overlooking a small, manicured garden. In the center sat an elderly man, his back to them, hunched over a small, portable electronic keyboard. His fingers, gnarled with age, moved with a surprising grace over the keys. His eyes, though open, were milky and unseeing. This was Elias. He finished a piece, a gentle, flowing stream of notes. And then, without turning, he spoke, his voice surprisingly robust for his age. "Ah, Willow, you've brought your sister. I hope my humble attempts didn't disturb her rest." "Never, Elias," Willow replied, her voice soft. She was listening intently. Abigail watched him, a strange fascination stirring within her. He was blind, his career as a concert pianist gone, yet he played with an obvious joy that was utterly alien to her current state. Music, you see, Elias began, his voice taking on a reflective tone, is ephemeral. It exists only in the moment of its creation, and then it's gone, carried away on the air. You can record it, but the true essence, the live resonance, that's fleeting. And yet it touches something eternal within us, doesn't it? He turned his head slightly as if looking in their direction. I used to chase perfection, the grand halls, the roar of the audience. But after I lost my sight, I learned that true art isn't just about what you leave behind, but the resonance you create in the present moment. For me, it's about playing for the nurses, for the patients, for the sheer joy of it. Not for fame, not for legacy, but for the connection. Abigail, despite her internal resistance, found herself intrigued. How did you cope with losing it all? She managed to croak, the aphasia still making her words clumsy. Elias smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that seemed to see more than her own failing eyes. Loss is a great teacher, young lady. It strips away everything you thought defined you, and then, if you're brave enough to look, it shows you what truly matters. I mourned my concerts, my grand pianos. But then I found a new music, a quiet symphony in the everyday. The laughter of a child, the whisper of the wind, the simple joy of sharing a melody with another soul. He paused, his fingers idly tracing a silent chord on the keys. The greatest masterpiece isn't always something you can touch or hold. Sometimes it's the silence between the notes, the feeling it leaves in your heart. Abigail listened, a tiny crack appearing in the cemented fortress of her despair. This man who had lost far more than she had, found joy in the ephemeral, in the unseen. He wasn't fighting his past, he was embracing his present. His words, though simple, resonated with a truth she had long ignored. Her entire life had been about permanence, about leaving a tangible mark. But what if that wasn't the only way to create? What if true art, true legacy, was something entirely different, something she had never considered? The thought was terrifying, yet strangely liberating. A tiny, fragile seed of curiosity began to sprout in the barren landscape of her heart. The scent of antiseptic and old flowers hung perpetually in the air of the palliative care common room, a strange blend that somehow amplified the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. Abigail, propped up in a wheelchair, had been wheeled there by Willow, who was now engaged in a hushed conversation with a nurse by the door. Abigail's gaze, though often unfocused due to the diplopia, rested on Elias. He sat by a window, his back to the pale afternoon light, fingers dancing over the keys of a small, worn electronic keyboard. The melody was simple, a familiar folk tune, yet infused with a poignant sweetness that seemed to fill the room, pushing back against the sterile silence. She had been fascinated by him since their first accidental encounter, a week ago. Elias, the blind musician, who had once graced grand concert halls, now found joy in these small, unassuming notes. His philosophy, shared in a voice that was surprisingly resonant for a man of 80-something, had resonated with a part of Abigail she thought long dead. True art isn't just about what you leave behind, he'd said, his sightless eyes seeming to look directly into her soul, but the resonance you create in the present moment. For Elias, the music was ephemeral, gone as soon as the last note faded, yet its impact, he insisted, was profound. It was a stark contrast to Abigail's own life's work, her obsession with permanence, with chiseling her existence into unyielding stone. Now, staring at her own rapidly approaching impermanence, his words had begun to chip away at her rigid worldview. "He's playing Scarborough Fair," Willow whispered, returning to Abigail's side. "Do you remember that song, Abby? Mom used to sing it to us." Abigail gave a faint nod. Her speech was still labored at times, a residual effect of the seizure and the brain lesions. But the aphasia was less severe than it had been. "He makes it beautiful," she rasped, the effort costing her. Elias finished the tune, his gnarled fingers resting on the keys. He seemed to sense their attention, turning his head slightly in their direction. "A simple tune, isn't it?" he said, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "But sometimes, the simplest things hold the most truth." Willow, ever the bridge builder, stepped forward. It was lovely, Elias. My sister Abigail, she's a sculptor. She really appreciates your sound. Elias chuckled. A sculptor, you say? Ah, then you understand the weight of creation. But perhaps you also understand the lightness of release. He paused, then continued, his voice taking on a reflective tone. When I lost my sight, and then my ability to play the grand piano with the precision I once commanded, I thought my world had ended. My art, my legacy, all gone. But then I found this little keyboard, and I found joy in playing for others, not for fame, not for perfection, but just for the resonance of the moment. The sound fades, yes, but the feeling, that lingers. A profound stillness settled around Abigail. The feeling that lingers. It was a concept so alien to her previous artistic dogma, yet it held an undeniable truth. She had always equated permanence with worth, tangibility with legacy. But what if the most profound art wasn't what you could touch or see, but what you could feel? What if her life, which she had thought was ending in failure, could still create something resonant? A new thought, fragile and tentative, began to bloom in the desolate landscape of her mind. She had come here to die, to say goodbye to a life that had failed to leave the permanent mark she had so desperately sought. But Elias's words, like a chisel tapping against a new kind of stone, were opening a different path. Elias, Abigail managed, her voice stronger this time, the words forming with less struggle. Would you allow me to create something for you? Willow looked at Abigail, startled, then back at Elias. Elias's brow furrowed slightly in thought, then a wide smile spread across his face. For me? My dear, that would be an honor. What do you have in mind? Abigail looked around the common room, her eyes, though still blurry, scanning the space with a new kind of vision. She saw the potted plants, the open window, the gentle sway of the curtains. She saw the small, forgotten chimes hanging in the garden outside, catching the faint breeze. A sound sculpture, she said, the words coming more easily now, a burgeoning excitement lending them a nascent energy. Just for you, impermanent, ephemeral, like music. Willow's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting in their depths. She had been watching Abigail retreat deeper and deeper into herself, a prisoner of her failing body and her shattered ambitions. Now, for the first time in weeks, she saw a spark, a flicker of the old Abigail, but transformed. What would you need? Willow asked, her voice laced with a tremor of anticipation. Abigail's gaze drifted toward the window, where the wind rustled the leaves of a small maple tree. Things that sing, she whispered, her mind already racing, sketching out possibilities. Pebbles, dried leaves, hollowed gourds, chimes from the garden. Things the wind can play. The next few days were a strange, beautiful dance of creation amidst the sterile backdrop of the palliative care unit. Abigail, fueled by an almost manic determination, directed Willow with a clarity that defied her physical state. Her ataxia still made fine movements impossible, but her artistic vision, once confined to the precise strokes of a chisel, now embraced the invisible currents of the air, the subtle shifts of light, the forgotten sounds of nature. They started in the garden, Willow carefully collecting smooth, water-worn pebbles, dried, brittle leaves that whispered secrets when rubbed together, and small, hollowed gourds she found discarded near a compost heap. Abigail, observing from her wheelchair, guided her with precise instructions. No, not that one. Too heavy. Look for the ones that feel hollow, that might resonate when the wind passes through them. Inside, around Elias's bed, Abigail began to weave her unseen masterpiece. She instructed Willow to hang the chimes from the curtain rods, positioning them just so to catch the faintest draft from the open window. The dried leaves were carefully placed on a small elevated shelf nearby, arranged in a way that the slightest air current would cause them to rustle and shift, creating a dry, papery whisper. The gourds, suspended on thin threads, were placed at varying heights, designed to clink softly against each other or brush against the wall, producing a dull, percussive thrum. The pebbles were scattered on a tray next to Elias's bed, so he could run his fingers over them, feeling their smooth, cool surfaces, listening to their gentle clatter as he moved them. It was a symphony of natural elements, carefully orchestrated by a dying artist who had found a new purpose. Abigail was not carving, not shaping with force, but arranging, inviting the unseen forces of nature to bring her creation to life. The physical effort was immense. Each directive, each gesture was exhausting. But for the first time in months, her mind felt truly engaged, liberated from the gnawing despair that had consumed her. She wasn't fighting the cancer. She was simply creating for the sheer, selfless joy of it. Willow watched in quiet awe. Her sister, who had so fiercely guarded her artistic process, now shared it with her, patiently explaining her vision, her intention. "It's about the movement, Willow," Abigail would say, her voice gaining strength with each passing hour of creation. "The subtle shifts, the way the light changes the air currents, the way Elias's own breath might stir a leaf. It's a piece that lives and breathes with the space, with him." One afternoon, as the last of the elements were put into place, a delicate mobile of polished shells that tinkled softly with the slightest breeze, Abigail leaned back in her wheelchair, a profound sense of peace settling over her. Her hands, though still shaky, felt strangely light. Her chest, though still tight with the cancer's grip, felt less burdened. She looked at Willow, a faint smile on her lips. "I came here to say goodbye," she whispered, the words resonating with a new depth. "But maybe there's one more thing I can say before I go, even if it's just a whisper." It wasn't about leaving a monument, it was about leaving a feeling, a resonance, and that, she realized, was a masterpiece in itself. Her breath hitched slightly, a wave of profound exhaustion washing over her. But it was an exhaustion tinged with something akin to joy. The final, delicate chimes, scavenged from an antique wind chime Willow had found in a quirky junk shop, were suspended from a thin, almost invisible fishing line near Elias's bed. Abigail, her hands trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes alight with a singular focus, directed Willow to adjust its height one last time. "Just a whisper higher, love." "Yes, there." The air current from a distant vent stirred the chime, producing a faint ethereal tinkle that seemed to hang in the air, a suspended note. Elias, his head cocked slightly, a serene smile spreading across his face, hummed softly. "It's beautiful, Abigail," he murmured, his voice a balm. "I can feel the movement, the intention, a symphony of whispers." Abigail leaned back in her wheelchair, a profound, almost dizzying sense of completion washing over her. The sound sculpture was done. Not for an exhibition, not for critics, not for permanence. Just for Elias. Just for this fleeting, precious moment. A wave of peace, deeper than any she had ever known, settled over her. It wasn't the peace of resignation, but the peace of profound release. She had let go. She had created something truly ephemeral, truly selfless. But the moment of peace was brutally short-lived. A searing pain, unlike any headache she had experienced before, exploded behind her eyes. It was as if 1,000 tiny chisels were fracturing her skull from the inside out. A gasp tore from her throat, raw and involuntary. Her vision, already compromised, blurred into a kaleidoscope of dancing lights and deepening shadows. The room began to spin violently, and a metallic taste flooded her mouth. "Abigail, what is it?" Willow's voice, sharp with alarm, cut through the escalating chaos in Abigail's head. Abigail tried to respond, to articulate the agony, but her tongue felt thick and unwieldy, a foreign object in her mouth. Her hands flew to her temples, pressing against the unimaginable pressure. A tremor ran through her body, starting as a subtle shiver and rapidly escalating into violent, uncontrollable convulsions. Her arms, then her legs, began to jerk spasmodically. The world tilted, then went black. Willow's scream was a raw, primal sound that echoed through the quiet common room. "Help! Someone! Help her! Dr. Thorne!" She lunged forward, her hands hovering uselessly over Abigail's convulsing form, her face a mask of abject terror. Elias, his hearing preternaturally sharp, rose slowly from his chair, his serene expression replaced by one of grave concern. Nurses, alerted by Willow's cries, rushed in, their movements swift and practiced. A code blue was called. Dr. Thorne, responding with an unnerving calm that belied the urgency, was by Abigail's side in moments. He barked orders, his fingers already feeling for a pulse, his eyes assessing the rapid, shallow breathing. Status epilepticus. Get her on her side. Oxygen. IV access now. Willow stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped over her mouth to stifle her sobs. This was it. This was the end. The final, brutal act of a body consumed. She watched as Abigail's once vibrant face, now pale and drawn, contorted in the throes of the seizure. The labored, rattling breaths were like a death rattle, each one tearing at Willow's heart. Dr. Thorne's expression, though professional, was grim, his eyes conveying a silent message of preparation for the worst. He gently but firmly moved Willow back, allowing the medical team to work. The rhythmic, desperate beeps of the medical equipment filled the air, a stark counterpoint to the quiet beauty of the sound sculpture. Now a silent, poignant witness to Abigail's apparent demise. The hours that followed blurred into an agonizing eternity for Willow. Abigail was moved to the critical care unit, a tangle of tubes and wires, her breathing shallow, her body unresponsive. Dr. Thorne spoke in hushed, somber tones about the severe neurological event, the extensive brain swelling, the grim prognosis. "We're doing everything we can, Willow," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "But it's critical. We need to prepare ourselves." Willow sat by Abigail's bedside, holding her cold, limp hand, whispering apologies, pleas, memories. She recounted their childhood adventures, the silly fights, the way Abigail's sculptures had always seemed to pulse with a hidden life. She spoke of Elias and the beautiful, ephemeral gift Abigail had created. She begged her sister to fight, to simply breathe. But there was no response, only the relentless, rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. Days bled into one another. Willow rarely left Abigail's side, sustained by lukewarm coffee and the flickering, desperate hope that refused to die. Dr. Thorne visited frequently, his face growing more puzzled with each passing day. The brain swelling, against all expectations, was starting to recede. The lesions, previously so aggressive, seemed quiescent. He ordered another MRI, a full body scan, almost expecting to find some new, devastating progression that would explain the temporary reprieve. The results came back 3 days later, and Dr. Thorne called Willow into a small consultation room, his face a mixture of disbelief and awe. He held up the new scans, comparing them to the previous ones. "Willow," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hushed, This is unprecedented." He pointed to the images of Abigail's brain. "The metastases, they've significantly regressed, not just stabilized, but shrunk, and the swelling, almost entirely gone." He then showed her the lung scans. "The primary tumor, it's stable. No new growth. In fact, it might even be slightly smaller." Willow stared, her mind struggling to comprehend. "But how? You said it was aggressive, untreatable." Dr. Thorne ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of genuine perplexity. "It is aggressive. For a stage 4 adenocarcinoma with brain metastases of this type, this kind of regression without active targeted treatment is unheard of. Medically, Willow, I have no explanation. None. It's beyond conventional understanding." He looked at her, his eyes wide with a quiet wonder. "It's remarkable. A miracle, for lack of a better word." Slowly, agonizingly, Abigail began to awaken. Her first conscious sensation was not pain, but a profound, almost blissful quiet in her head. A stark contrast to the relentless hammering that had plagued her for months. Her vision, though still a little blurry, was clearer than it had been since the diagnosis. The crippling headaches were gone, replaced by a dull ache that was easily managed. When she tried to move, her limbs responded, albeit weakly, without the familiar, frustrating lurch of ataxia. Willow was there, her face a tear-streaked canvas of relief and disbelief. "Abigail," she whispered, her voice cracking, You're back." Abigail's first words were hoarse, weak, but perfectly clear. "Willow, the chimes. Did Elias like them?" A week later, Abigail was moved out of critical care, then out of the hospital entirely. Her recovery was slow, requiring physical therapy to regain strength and coordination, but it was undeniable. The neurological deficits continued to recede, her balance improving with each painstaking step. She walked with a cane, but she walked. She saw clearly, she spoke without slurring, and the seizures had not returned. Her first outing was to the palliative care unit. She walked purposefully, if slowly, into the common room, guided by Willow. Elias was there, sitting by the window, his fingers once again dancing on the keyboard. The chimes of the sound sculpture, still suspended, caught the light, and a faint, sweet melody drifted through the air as a gentle breeze stirred them. Elias looked up, his face illuminated by a profound smile, not with his eyes but with an inner knowing. "Abigail," he said, his voice soft, filled with a gentle joy. "You've returned." Abigail went to him, her heart overflowing. She sat beside him, listening to the music of the chimes, a symphony of improbable healing. "I returned," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "because I finally learned to listen." The wave of peace, deeper than any she had known, was immediately followed by a terrifying jolt. A sharp, searing pain exploded behind her eyes, a familiar, unwelcome guest that had grown monstrous in its intensity. Her vision, already compromised, blurred into a kaleidoscope of dancing lights and deepening shadows. Her breath hitched, a ragged, desperate gasp that turned into a strangled cough. The room began to spin, not gently like the chimes, but violently, a disorienting vortex that pulled her down. She could hear Willow's frantic voice, a distant muffled sound, and Elias's concerned murmur, but the words were unintelligible, swallowed by the roar in her ears. Her head lolled to the side, her muscles refusing to respond. A cold sweat plastered her hair to her forehead, and a profound weakness, unlike anything she had experienced even in the depths of her chemotherapy, enveloped her. It was as if every fiber of her being was shutting down one by one. The air grew thick, pressing down on her lungs, making each attempt to draw breath a monumental, agonizing effort. She felt a strange detachment, watching herself from a distance, her body a failing machine, finally giving up. A flicker of something like acceptance, not despair, passed through her. This is it, she thought, not with fear, but with a weary sense of inevitability. She had finished her task. She had given her last, best gift. Now the silence. Willow's scream was raw, guttural, slicing through the muffled chaos. "Abby! Abigail, help! Someone, please! She's seizing!" Hands were on her, gentle but firm, then a flurry of movement and hushed, urgent voices. Dr. Thorne's calm, authoritative tone cut through the rising panic. "Pulse check. Get her onto her side. Oxygen. Stat!" Abigail felt a cool mask against her face, the faint hiss of oxygen filling her nostrils, but it did little to alleviate the crushing weight in her chest. Her limbs twitched uncontrollably, a final, desperate protest from a body losing its grip. The pain in her head intensified to an unbearable crescendo. Then mercifully, everything faded into a vast, inky blackness. The next few days were a blur, punctuated by fragmented sensations and fleeting moments of awareness. She remembered the persistent, sterile smell of antiseptic, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the soft hum of medical machinery. She felt the cool touch of a nurse's hand on her forehead, the gentle pressure of a blood pressure cuff. Willow's voice was a constant, low murmur in the background, sometimes strong, sometimes laced with a fragile hope she couldn't quite grasp. There were needles, IV drips, a constant, dull ache that resonated deep within her bones. But the searing pain in her head was gone, replaced by a strange, almost eerie quiet. Then one morning, the fog began to lift. Slowly, incrementally, the world sharpened into focus. The sterile white ceiling, the soft light filtering through the blinds, the faint scent of tea. She opened her eyes fully, and for the first time in months, the double vision was gone. The world was single, clear, defined. She blinked, testing it, then blinked again. Her breath came easier, a natural, unforced rhythm. The crushing weight was gone. Willow was slumped in a chair beside her bed, her head resting on her arms asleep. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale and drawn, etched with worry. Abigail reached out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and gently touched Willow's arm. Willow stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and then snapping wide as she saw Abigail, truly saw her. "Abby," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. You're awake, and your eyes, they're clear." Tears welled instantly in Willow's eyes, spilling freely down her cheeks. Dr. Thorne arrived shortly after, his usual pragmatic demeanor replaced by a mixture of profound bewilderment and cautious optimism. He conducted a thorough examination, his brow furrowed in concentration. He checked her reflexes, her pupils, her motor skills. He listened to her lungs, palpated her abdomen. His movements were precise, methodical, but there was an underlying tremor in his hands. "Abigail," he said, his voice unusually soft, "you've been through quite an ordeal. We were very concerned." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We ran a new MRI this morning, given your improvement, and the results are unprecedented." He held up a series of scans, pointing to them with a pen. "The brain metastases, they've significantly regressed. Some are completely gone. The others are dramatically smaller and show no active growth. And your lung nodules, while still present, they appear stable. No progression. In fact, there's even a slight reduction in size in the primary tumor." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering, as if searching for an answer in her eyes. "Medically, Abigail, there is no explanation. Given the aggressive nature of your adenocarcinoma and its rapid metastasis, this is beyond conventional understanding. It's a miracle, for lack of a better word." He shook his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "You were quite literally at death's door, and now you're here, and you're healing." The word hung in the air, resonant and profound. Healing. Not just a reprieve, not just a stabilization, but a true, undeniable healing. Abigail felt a strange sensation, not of triumph, but of deep, quiet awe. She looked at Willow, whose face was a mixture of tears and dawning, joyous hope. She looked at Dr. Thorne, whose medical certainty had been shattered by an inexplicable truth. Slowly, carefully, Abigail pushed herself up, testing the new lightness in her limbs. The ataxia was still present, a faint tremor in her hands, a slight unsteadiness in her gait, but it was profoundly diminished. It was as if a heavy cloak had been lifted from her body. The air tasted different, fresher, imbued with a clarity she hadn't noticed before. Later that afternoon, with Willow's steadying arm, Abigail walked, for the first time in weeks, to Elias's room. The sound sculpture was still there, the chimes swaying gently in the subtle currents of the room. Elias was awake, his head tilted, listening intently. When he heard their approach, a wide, beatific smile spread across his face. "Abigail," he said, his voice warm with welcome, "I felt you coming, and I heard a change in the music." He gestured to the chimes. "It sounds brighter today, more hopeful." Abigail sat beside him, taking his hand. "Elias," she whispered, her voice still a little hoarse, but strong. "It is. It truly is." She closed her eyes, listening to the delicate, resonant silence between the chimes, a silence that now hummed with a new, miraculous possibility. The legacy she had once desperately sought in stone had found its voice in these ephemeral notes, and in the profound, inexplicable shift within her own being. The air grew thick, pressing down on her, stealing the very oxygen from her lungs. Abigail felt herself slipping, falling into a chasm of blackness, the gentle tinkle of the chimes fading into an unbearable silence. This was it, the final surrender. She had given her last, best piece of herself, and now finally she was free to go. A strange, serene acceptance settled over her, even as the pain raged. Goodbye, Willow. Goodbye, Elias. Goodbye, world. The world, however, had other plans for Abigail. When she surfaced, it was not to the blinding white light of an afterlife, but to the muted hum of hospital machinery and the soft, rhythmic beep of a monitor. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy, glued shut by an invisible force. A familiar, yet somehow different scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils. Slowly, with an effort that felt monumental, she pried open her eyes. The first thing she saw was the soft, muted light of a room not her own, and the blurred shape of a figure slumped in a chair beside her bed. Willow. Her sister's usually vibrant hair was disheveled, her face etched with exhaustion and the residue of recent tears. As Abigail's vision slowly sharpened, she saw the faint, dark circles beneath Willow's eyes, the way her shoulders were hunched. A pang, not of guilt, but of something akin to a fierce protectiveness, stirred within Abigail. She tried to speak, but her throat felt rough, as if she hadn't used it in days. A dry, rasping sound emerged. Willow's head shot up, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Abigail?" Her voice was hoarse, thick with emotion. "Water," Abigail managed, her voice a mere whisper. Willow scrambled to pour a glass, her hands trembling as she held the straw to Abigail's lips. The cool liquid was a revelation, soothing the parched landscape of her throat. As she drank, Abigail became more aware of her body. The crushing headache was gone, replaced by a dull throb, a mere phantom limb of the agony that had consumed her. The disorienting spin had ceased. Her limbs, though weak, felt present, grounded. "Oh, Abigail," Willow sobbed, clutching her hand, burying her face in the blankets. "Oh, thank God. We thought... Dr. Thorne said..." Her voice broke, swallowed by fresh tears. It took time, days even, for Abigail to fully grasp the gravity of what had happened and what was happening now. Dr. Thorne, his expression a mix of awe and professional bewilderment, confirmed Willow's unspoken fears. "Abigail, you suffered a profound neurological event, a severe seizure, likely exacerbated by the brain metastases. We were preparing for the worst." He paused, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. But then, something shifted. He showed her the new MRI scans, side by side with the old ones. The difference was staggering. The large, angry brain lesions that had marred her previous scans were undeniably significantly smaller. Some had even vanished, leaving behind only faint scar tissue. The lung nodules, too, showed remarkable stability, even a slight regression that defied all previous projections for her aggressive adenocarcinoma. I have no medical explanation, Abigail," Dr. Thorne admitted, his voice hushed with a rare humility. "We've rerun the tests, checked the imaging. Your body, it's doing something unprecedented, something beyond conventional understanding." He looked at her, truly looked at her, his pragmatic scientist's gaze softened by a touch of wonder. "It's a miracle." The word hung in the air, weighty and impossible. Abigail felt a tremor of disbelief ripple through her, followed by a profound sense of grace. A quiet, undeniable truth settled within her. It wasn't just her body that had healed, it was something far deeper. The surrender, the letting go of her need for permanence, the act of selfless creation. It had cracked open something within her, allowing a different kind of life to flow in. Slowly, meticulously, she began the long road of recovery. The ataxia, though still present, was significantly less pronounced. Her vision, while not perfect, was clearer. The debilitating diplopia almost gone. She started with short walks, then longer ones, each step a testament to the inexplicable shift within her. Her first outing, as soon as she was strong enough, was back to the palliative care unit. She found Elias in the common room, a small smile on his face as he listened to the gentle, evolving music of her sound sculpture. The chimes, the rustling leaves, the soft, resonating pebbles. They still whispered their ephemeral symphony. Elias, hearing her approach, turned his head. "Abigail," he said, his voice warm with recognition. "You're back." "I am," she replied, her own voice stronger than she remembered. She sat beside him, closing her eyes, allowing the sounds to wash over her. "It still works," she said, a quiet joy in her tone. "Of course it does," Elias chuckled. "True art, even ephemeral art, leaves its resonance." He paused, then added, his voice soft. "You came back changed, my dear. I can feel it. The intention is different, lighter." Abigail opened her eyes, looking at the man who, in her darkest hour, had shown her a different path to purpose. "I came to say goodbye, Elias," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I truly did, but I left with hope, not just for myself, but for every precious, fleeting moment we have to truly connect." She knew with a certainty that resonated deep within her bones that her life as a sculptor of stone was over. The Ascension sculpture, still unfinished in her studio, would remain so. It was a monument to her past self, a reminder of the ambition that had once consumed her. But her new art was living, breathing, and ever-evolving. It was the art of connection, of presence, of helping others find their own ephemeral art in the face of their own endings. Her studio, once a solitary realm of chisels and dust, was transformed. With Willow now, her unwavering partner and confidant, by her side, it became a vibrant, communal space for patients from the palliative care unit. They explored adaptive art forms, creating soundscapes with found objects, painting with light projections, crafting tactile sculptures from soft fabrics and natural elements. There were no exhibitions, no critics, no quest for permanence, only the shared joy of creation, the quiet dignity of expression, and the profound healing power of human connection. Abigail, the fiercely independent sculptor, had found her true masterpiece not in unyielding stone, but in the fluid, vibrant, and infinitely precious tapestry of living, breathing art.